Adobe just had their best revenue year in company history, making $23.7 billion. And yet, their stock is down 66% from its peak, and their CEO of 18 years just resigned. For 3 decades, Adobe had a grip on the creative industry that no other software company has ever matched. So how does a company that made itself impossible to leave finally start to fail? To answer that, you need to understand what Adobe actually built. In 1982, 2 engineers walked out of Xerox, frustrated that the company had no interest in commercializing their own research, and started Adobe. Their first product was PostScript, a programming language that told printers exactly how to render text and images. And it was good enough that in 1985, Steve Jobs personally flew to their office to negotiate a deal where Apple would invest $2.5 million for a 15% stake in the company. That single deal put Adobe on the map, but Adobe was just getting started. In 1990, Adobe launched Photoshop 1 at $895. You see, before Photoshop, professional image retouching cost hundreds of dollars an hour, and Photoshop made that accessible to everyone, and it quietly became the only option. By the mid-1990s, it was the industry standard for image editing, and by 2000, Adobe's annual revenue crossed $1 billion. Over the next decade, they built a tool for every part of the creative process. From design, video, motion graphics, documents, you name it, they covered everything. And by the 2000s, if you worked in the creative field, you used Adobe. And you also knew that there was no alternative. And then in 2011, Apple handed them the video market on a plate. Apple released Final Cut Pro X, a complete rebuild of their own professional video editor. But the new version couldn't open projects from the old one. They removed a bunch of features. From multicam editing to XML export, they completely removed it. People were furious and Apple offered refunds. But Adobe was ready. They immediately offered 50% discounts to every editor who wanted to switch. Within months, Premiere Pro had become the industry standard for professional video editing. By 2012, over 90% of creative professionals worldwide used Adobe products, and Adobe was generating $4.4 billion a year in revenue. But here's what most people missed about Adobe's dominance. It wasn't just that their software was the best. Adobe owned the file formats the entire industry ran on. In 2013, Adobe launched Creative Cloud, a subscription service that replaced the one-time purchase model entirely. But the moment you stopped paying, you lost access to every single file you'd ever created inside their software, and they made sure that you could never afford to leave. And in 2013, Narayan was about to prove exactly how far he was willing to take that. And the way they did that wasn't just through file formats and subscriptions. They made sure that there was nowhere else to go. You see, Adobe had been acquiring companies since the early 1980s. By the time Creative Cloud launched, they had already made between 39 to 46 acquisitions. Every time a tool threatened their core products, they bought it and shut it down. The clearest example of this is FreeHand. FreeHand was a vector illustration tool that thousands of designers considered better than the Illustrator. And it started at a company called Aldus. And when Adobe tried to acquire Aldus in 1994, the FTC ruled that Adobe owning both FreeHand and the Illustrator would give them a monopoly in vector graphics and force them to give it up. And FreeHand ended up at a company called Macromedia. But when Adobe acquired Macromedia in 2005 for $3.4 billion, FreeHand came with it. But this time, there was nothing stopping them. Within 2 years of the acquisition, Adobe killed development on FreeHand entirely. No updates, no migration path, no explanation beyond pointing users toward Illustrator. And the community reaction was immediate. 6,500 designers formed an organization called FreeHand. They sent letters, they ran media campaigns, they demanded Adobe either continue development or release the source code to the open source community. One designer wrote publicly that Adobe broke his heart by killing FreeHand, and he had over 18 years of archive projects and nowhere else to go. But when nobody listened, they filed an antitrust lawsuit in 2011 accusing Adobe of deliberately killing a competitor to protect his own monopoly. Sadly, the case was settled in 2012 and Adobe kept the code close. The same thing happened to Flash Player, Fireworks, and half a dozen other tools Adobe acquired over the years. So when Narayan stood on stage at Adobe Max and announced Adobe was moving to a subscription-only model permanently, it was the same playbook at a much larger scale. Before Creative Cloud, Adobe sold their software as a one-time purchase called Creative Suite, and Creative Suite 6 was a one-time fee of $2,600, whereas Creative Cloud was $600 a year forever. In just 5 years, you'd spend more than the one-time price and own absolutely nothing. And that was exactly the point. Narayan announced that there would never be a new version. Within 72 hours, 50,000 people had signed a petition and forums were flooded with rage. One user wrote that he resents paying a monthly fee for a software that does exactly the same thing it did in all the previous versions. And another wrote that if he wanted to cancel his $15 per month plan, he had to pay over $80 to cancel it. And the subscriptions weren't just expensive. The default plan, the one Adobe pushed everyone towards, looked like a monthly subscription, but you were locked in for a full year. And if you tried to cancel early, Adobe charged you 50% of every remaining month on your contract. And despite all of this backlash, investors loved it. Adobe stock went from $45 in 2013 to over $700 in 2021, a 1,400% gain. But the more Adobe tightened their grip, the angrier people got, and even the government started paying attention. In June 2024, the FTC filed a lawsuit against Adobe. What they found was exactly what users had been complaining for years: hidden cancellation fees, deliberately confusing sign-up flows, and a cancellation process designed to make leaving as painful as possible. The government called it a dark pattern, which is a user interface deliberately designed to trap people into staying. In March this year, Adobe settled for $150 million, $75 million in penalties paid to the government, and $75 million in free services distributed to affected customers. But no admission of wrongdoing. But for the very first time, Adobe was legally required to make it easier for people to leave. But the FTC lawsuit wasn't even the biggest hit Adobe took during this period. You see, in September 2022, Adobe announced that they were acquiring Figma for $20 million. Figma was a browser-based collaborative design tool that had quietly captured 80 to 85% of the UI and UX design market. It was everything Adobe's tools weren't. It was lightweight, collaborative, and most of all, free to start. And Adobe wanted to own it, and designers immediately knew what was coming. They'd seen the same pattern before, but this time it didn't work. The UK Competition and Markets Authority opened a formal investigation into whether Adobe acquiring Figma would eliminate the only credible competitor to their design tools. And even the European Commission opened their own investigation and reached the exact same conclusion. Both of them said that this acquisition would harm innovation and reduce competition in design software. And on December 18, 2023, the Figma deal collapsed, and Adobe had to pay Figma a $1 billion breakup fee. Figma took that $1 billion and filed for their own IPO and became a public company anyway. But Adobe wasn't done making enemies. In June 2024, Adobe quietly updated their terms of service. They added a clause that said that Adobe could access user content through automated and manual methods, including machine learning. Creators immediately understood what that meant. Adobe was potentially using their work to train AI without their consent. #DitchAdobe started trending. Thousands of creators posted cancellation threats, videos flooded social media. Even Adobe's own employees were frustrated and questioned their motives. And Adobe backtracked this decision within a few days. Then in February 2026, Adobe announced that they were shutting down Animate, a tool that animators had been relying on for over 25 years. Tom Scott posted something that captured exactly how the creative community felt. Adobe once again reversed this decision within 48 hours, but by this point, people were done with this crap. Years of hidden fees, price hikes, and tools getting killed without any warning. And for the first time, they actually had alternatives. Canva launched in 2013, the exact same year Adobe killed Creative Suite, as a simple browser-based design tool for people with no professional designer experience. But here's the part that makes the story even better. In 2007, Melanie Perkins, the founder of Canva, flew to San Francisco and pitched the idea of a simple online design platform directly to Adobe executives. Adobe told her that the market for design tools were already dominated by their own products, and that a simpler tool for non-professionals wasn't a viable business. Canva now has 265 million monthly active users with a $65 billion valuation and $4 billion in annual revenue. Canva wasn't the only alternative being built. Affinity had been offering professional design tools as a one-time purchase since 2014. No subscriptions, you paid it once and kept it forever. In 2024, Canva acquired Affinity for $380 million and then made the entire suite free.
Entirely free, forever, for everyone.
a professional suite that competed directly with Photoshop and Illustrator is now completely free. And Adobe had no answer for that. Then there's DaVinci Resolve. It's a professional video editor that had been used in Hollywood for decades. It's free to download, free to use, no watermarks, and no time limit. And there was a paid version, but it only cost $295 as a one-time fee. Grant Petty, the CEO of Blackmagic Design, which makes DaVinci, had a very specific view on the subscription model. He called cloud licensors slumlords, and that you have to keep buying from them, and the more loyal you are, and the more penalized you get. And people started listening. Designers like Tom Versation, who had used Adobe for over 15 years, switched to Affinity and never looked back. Celeste, a graphic designer, switched from Creative Cloud to the free Affinity suite in late 2025. And it only took her one full day to learn the new interface. Over the following 6 months, she saved about $600. The pattern was the same across all of them. It took maybe 2 to 4 weeks of relearning, but you save hundreds of dollars every single year. And at the end, they all came to the same conclusion, that the alternatives were good enough. But enterprise customers weren't going anywhere. They described Adobe as infrastructure. Replacing it would mean months of migration, retraining, and workflow redesign. For 30 years, nothing had come close to changing that, until something came along that meant that you didn't need to stay there at all.
A world first in AI-powered design.
So, let's talk about AI.
Built for the AI era, Canvas Sheets does the hard work for you.
Adobe had watched this coming for years. In March 2023, they launched Firefly, their own generative AI model built directly into Creative Cloud. You can generate images, build backgrounds, and create designs entirely from a text prompt. Within a year, users had generated over 13 billion assets. And by mid-2026, that number had crossed 24 billion. I mean, the strategy was deliberate. If you generated something inside Photoshop, it automatically saved as a Photoshop file. Adobe was trying to make sure that even in an AI world, the workflow still ended up inside their software. I mean, I get it. It was a smart defensive move, except for one problem. If you're generating from scratch, you never need to open their software in the first place. The trap only worked if you started inside it. And despite 24 billion assets generated, Firefly contributed less than 2% of Adobe's total revenue. And here's why that gap exists. Every major AI company treats AI output as the products. ChatGPT Plus and Cloud Pro both charge $20 a month for specific allocation of usage. Every output has a cost attached to it, but Adobe did the opposite. They bundle unlimited standard generations into a subscription that already costs $60 a month. Billions of outputs being generated, and almost none of it is driving additional revenue. And while Adobe was trying to solve the problem, everyone else was moving faster. Canva launched an entirely AI-driven design platform in April this year. You describe what you want in plain language and it builds the design for you. You don't need no tools, no layers, basically no learning curve. The same platform that started as a simple alternative to Photoshop is now an AI-first creative operating system, and AI is estimated to contribute 15 to 20% of Canva's total revenue, compared to 2% of Adobe's. And even Figma launched their own AI design agent in May this year, generating and remixing designs directly on the canvas, respecting existing design system and handing it off to developers automatically. And then there's Midjourney. With over 21 million users, $500 million in revenue in 2025, fully self-funded, no venture capital, and no corporate parent. This is just a team of roughly 100 people charging $10 a month for image generation, and they've been profitable since 2022. One Wall Street analyst said it best, that AI didn't just challenge Adobe, it made their entire advantage obsolete overnight. I mean, don't get me wrong, Adobe was still generating record revenue. Creative industry was moving on without them. So what actually happens to a company making more money than ever that's slowly becoming irrelevant? The numbers clearly tell the story. Revenue is still growing. They're estimated to make $25.9 billion in 2026, and they're showing record numbers every quarter, but their stock is still down 66% from its all-time high. Adobe isn't dying, but the market has stopped believing in the growth story. Narayan announced that he was stepping down as CEO after 18 years. The man who built the subscription model was leaving right as the model was being threatened, and no successor has been named yet. Meanwhile, the alternatives have never been stronger. Canva is valued at $65 billion a year, and it's growing 43% every single year. And Figma went public, and Midjourney is profitable with a team of just 100 people, and the creative industry isn't waiting for Adobe to figure it out. And the final irony is this: Adobe didn't lose to a better product, or they didn't lose lose to a cheaper subscription. They lost to a technology that made their software completely optional. For 30 years, the trap worked because there was nowhere else to go, but AI completely changed that. Do you think Adobe survives this next decade? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and I'll see you on the next one.